Welcome to the Success from Anywhere podcast, sponsored by Salesforce. Here's your host, Karen Mangia.
My next guest started her career in the fashion industry, and along the way, she made a powerful discovery. Caring is the new couture. What's always in fashion is living well and working well, and it turns out both are possible. I'm thrilled to welcome today an expert on how to transform into caring cultures, caring colleagues, and caring individuals. Welcome, Jeanette Bronée. You stepped into the space of thinking about how to live and work well based on your own journey. Tell us a little bit more about the starting place that got you curious.
Yes, what got me really curious was 2 burnouts and both my parents dying of cancer just a year apart and being told it was only a matter of when I was going to get cancer too. And I thought, it's time to rethink how I take care of myself and also still be able to take care of my career. And so I sort of set out on a journey to figure out what makes us sick, what makes us healthy. And I realized that if we can focus on what makes us healthy and really thrive, we can actually be healthy and busy at the same time. So that's the short of it.
Well, and I think the question is, what are we busy about? And a question I get so often from readers and people I'm engaging with on a day-to-day basis is, well, how do I make time for this? I'm already burnt out. How am I going to make time for this wonderful wellness journey that you're referring to?
Yeah. I think that is the big misconception, right? Is that self-care takes time. But if we really think about what is self-care, we tend to think of it as a habit, something we do in our own time. It's a treat. Sometimes we even think of it as a product. It's a huge industry at this point. But reality is that we have self-care with us all the time because it's a mindset. So we are self-caring or not all the time. It's there in the background, meaning we might not be very kind to ourselves, not very caring to ourselves, but it's there all the time. So it's actually much more of this underlying relationship we have with ourselves that I think of as self-care, which will then show up in a habit or an action or something like that. But it doesn't have to be so glamorous that as we've made it out to be. It's actually very basic. It's a little bit so-called down and dirty. And really we need to demystify what self-care really means so that we can take advantage of it.
Hearing you say that reminds me of so many times when I've dreamed of canceling all of my meetings, sleeping in and doing a full self-care day, right? And I'm usually picturing I need an expansive amount of time for this recovery. And, maybe I'm doing a spa day or I'm lounging on the couch or whatever that looks like. And then I get overwhelmed at the thought of how much time that might take. And the reality is the effects evaporate quickly. Yeah. And I wonder what other myths and misperceptions we might all be carrying about self-care.
Yeah. And let me just say, those things are really nice, but it's more of a treat, right? It's not what sustains us. It's what picks us back up. And so if we can think of self-care as what sustains us throughout the day, rather than what we need so that we can recover. So that's one of the misconceptions around it. The other one is that resilience. We think a lot of times of resilience as we can just keep going through. We don't need anything, or it's like a week if we need it, and so on and so forth. But I really think of it more as smart, how we're more smart about how we get through the day. Because the reality is that if we are running on empty, we're actually not working well. And so again, it's this idea that performance is about keep pushing, keep running, keep moving, keep doing, when self-care can just be a pause. It can just be that small pause. It may be that we need a glass of water, take a sip sometimes.
I'll join you.
There you go. Right? That small pause that just allows us to stay hydrated all day could be one of those, but it could also be more of a mindset check-in, like that awareness that happens to just get our nervous system back down. And all of those things is not about taking huge chunks of time out. And it actually accelerates and makes us better in terms of our performance than slowing us down or taking away from. It actually adds to it because it allows us to come out of survival mode. And the moment we can come out of survival mode, we actually make better decisions, we engage better with other people, we make more discerning choices. So a lot of these things that happen when we just land for a moment and come out of that survival mindset of go, 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 and instead recognize that our strength as human beings is being human.
I often use the phrase, try to focus on being a human being instead of a human doing. And I've been thinking a lot and writing about and speaking a lot about permission to pause since I faced my own major medical crisis and discovered the power of it. What I find so often though, and I don't know if this is consistent with your experience, we often wait on someone else, like a boss or a significant other, to give us permission to pause. How do we tap into giving that permission to ourselves?
The $1 million question there. Let's solve it.
Well, good. It's okay to pause and think about the response, since that's the theme that we're discussing.
Yeah, I do believe that it's this society has a tendency to make us believe that we have to have an answer right away, we have to react right away, we have to do right away. It's this sort of like immediate response. It is very ingrained in us. So I'm thinking that it's about permission to pause. Yes, if it's like, I'm gonna need 5 minutes before our meeting, like allowing ourselves to speak up. And I also think it's the recognition that we do actually work better when our attention is fully engaged. So we can't be present if we're like still thinking about the last meeting. So if we're actually being more respectful of the other person, if we say, listen, I need 5 minutes before our meeting because I just need to process what happened in the last meeting so I can be fully there for you. So I think part of the problem that we see is that we think permission is about the other person letting us take time out for ourselves, when really it's about leaning in to what we're going to do next. We're actually showing up more. And if we can switch that perception over and recognize that self-care is not really about self, it's about paying attention, taking care, being mindful with a care-driven mindset, engaging in care-driven conversations, being a care-driven leader. Like those are the principles that start shifting that, oh, and this is not about getting permission. This is, I need so that I can. And I think that shift is very, it's almost like we need to change our mindset about that we matter on a human level, not just on a performance, productivity, efficiency level, but really understanding what is the foundation for reaching that. Does that make sense?
Yes. And what you said there is so powerful, that sentence of, I need so that I can. And what I'm wondering is, how do you do that? I mean, how do you step into these caring conversations? What does that look like?
One of the things that I do when I talk about the self-care mindset is I base that on 4 questions that we ask ourselves, but the power pausing comes first, because again, when we're running on survival mode, we're just running on our old habits. We're just doing what we always do on instinct. So nothing new can happen. Nothing can change. Nothing new can come. We lose out on creativity and innovation and connection with other people and conversations and better collaboration. So the very first step is to come out of survival mode. Nothing happens if we don't do that pause and just really say, okay, what do I need right now so that I can be more present? But the 4 questions that I always ask for is, who's talking right now? Is it the inner critic or the inner coach? Because a lot of times if the inner critic is driving the car, we're not going anywhere. We're just going that way. And we're looking for the problems. We're looking for what's not working. And we need to shift perspective to saying, okay, this is not working, but what do I need so I can make it work? And we can only do that if we sort of become the inner coach. If we have that place of self-compassion that allows us to then be in that different mindset, asking different questions. So part of my background is that I'm a hypnotherapist. And it's not so much that I want to put people in a trance, except sometimes maybe I bore them to death, and I do. Nah. Hopefully not.
Impossible.
But it's more that how the way we ask questions keeps working in our unconscious mind. And as it's working in our unconscious mind, we can shift based on how we ask questions, what we focus on, right? And so under survival mode, we're running on the negativity bias. We look for what's not working because we're under fear. We're fear driven. We're running in that old instinctual way. That's why the power pause is so important, is so that we can shift and say, okay, this is not working, but what do I need so I can make a shift? Is moving over and saying, well, if I'm the inner coach, what would I say to myself? How would I engage with myself differently? How would I ask questions differently so that they become curious and constructive rather than critical, right? So we're shifting over. So that's that first step. It's like, who's talking, who's thinking, and who's talking. And then we go to the self-awareness. Hey, how am I in there right now? Because if I'm feeling anxious underneath it all, then there's a good chance that I'm, again, going to have that mindset on the anxiety. But if I'm anxious, can I work with that? Can I lean into that? Can I be more with that instead of trying to avoid it and reject it or suppress it or ignore it, which is often where trouble comes in, because we're ignoring sort of that. I don't like to call it intuition because it sort of has a so-called bad name, but that gut feeling, that gut sense that sometimes if we ignore it, we're also ignoring our integrity. So I think of that other side of intuition as integrity, right? It's that sense of us being in right relationship with how we feel so that we can show up better. And then that next question comes that says, okay, so what do I need right now so that I can? That comes based on who's thinking and how are we feeling. And then the last one is, what do I need to ask for so that I can take charge of this myself? So those are sort of 4 questions that I use in the self-care mindset. And in the beginning, that takes a little time. But as we're practicing it, it starts becoming automatic. It becomes like a sentence, and then we're there. We shift our focus really fast. That's the power of the mind. And so if we think of self-care as a mindset, we can use that to really sort of like move over, focus on solving the problem. And then we're not draining ourselves because we're gaining energy from being problem solvers instead of draining ourselves and our energy and our focus and our attention because we're focusing so much on what's not working. What are we not doing right? And we're going, okay, fine. What do I need so that I can? And now we get the energy because we get energy from what we care about. That was a long.
Oh, that it's perfect. And what I like about your 4 questions and thinking about that starting place is in that shift from the inner critic to the inner coach. I mean, someone watching or listening to us right now is going to tell us that the best coaches and that their inner coach, screams and yells and throws chairs and has an unbelievable winning perfect record. And what I wonder is not only how do we switch from inner critic to inner coach, but how can we become a compassionate coach, both to ourselves and extend that compassion to others, whether that's colleagues, family members, friends?
Mm-hmm. One of the ways is to actually acknowledge how we feel, because a lot of times when we dismiss how we feel, we're also not compassionate. And that's where that permission comes in that you asked about before as well, right? If we have permission to feel and actually see that feeling is our superpower. I'm not talking about being emotional because that's a behavior that comes from suppressing our emotions. I'm talking about using those core-driven emotions that are part of our human engaging interaction with each other. It's part of how we drive connection. So if we can allow that to happen, we're already more compassionate. Right? So if you're thinking about it, like we've been so harsh on ourselves around having emotions, but we all want the happy ones. We all want the cheerful ones. We all want the good ones. Those are emotions just as much as oh my God, I'm not feeling right now. Oh, okay, I'm doubtful right now. I have anxiety right now. Those are emotions too. So we can't just be like, I don't want those half, but I want the other half. It's not how it works. We're not whole humans that way. And if you think about AI, they're trying to be like us. They're trying to figure out how to have human emotions. So there must be something good about it, right? And so essentially, if we can start even seeing that emotions is what makes us powerful, it's our relationship with our emotions that might or might not work.
Well, it sounds like the most important factor is really accepting and tapping into our humanity, our deepest level of our humanity.
Yeah, it's the simple tool about from all of this. This is all because I have been a mindfulness practitioner and studied mindfulness and really for more than I think more than 30 years at this point, and really trying to understand how our human behavior and our human mind and our human emotions fit together. So when we think a lot about well-being, especially in a culture, we think a lot about it as being, programs or perks or things that we can sort of add to benefits and things like that. And as much as benefits are great because it gives us access to help. So I'm not saying that that's not good and helpful. What I'm saying is that we need to actually look at self-care as something that doesn't cost money. Self-care comes down to conversations, and it starts with the one we have with ourselves, which then affects the ones we have with each other, which then creates a well-being culture. So when I think about a well-being culture right now, I think about one that has healthy relationships, not one that has more benefits. And that's where it doesn't cost money. You can argue it costs money to facilitate these conversations and learn how to have them. Okay, fine, yes. But in our day-to-day, it's not that costly to start engaging in conversations, because a power pause doesn't cost anything. Quite the opposite. It helps us gain time back.
When you were speaking, I was thinking about that mindset of self-care, and I happen to love to cook, and I view that preparing nourishing food for myself is an act of self-care. But how does food fit into the self-care landscape for you?
Well, I'm also an integrative nutritionist and mindful sort of mind body health professional. So I do think that we very often become accidental eaters, where we don't plan our food as part of our fuel. So we grab something, which then ends up becoming whatever is available, rather than something we've chosen because we use that better. And if we think about how our bodies function, and our mind functions, you may know this, but a lot of people don't know that the brain is the organ that uses up the most calories. And so a lot of times we think of not eating all day. And instead we overeat at night, with the result that we eat too much. We don't get our sleep. Now we're tired. So now we're running on coffee. And then we don't eat again all day. And then again, the same thing over and over and over. So if we can really actually look at how can I get my meals throughout the day? What do I need to actually really fuel my body, which essentially comes down to carbohydrates, protein, and good fats. But how can we choose that from just real food? And again, I'm trying to be more basic about it rather than more fancy about it. This idea that we can eat something that is not, chef designed or anything like that. I used to work with a group that helped homeless teenagers in New York City. And they were actually quite curious about how to eat better instead of just having things that came out of a package. And a lot of them were Hispanic. And I talked to them about how their heritage food was rice and bean. And so they would be like, but can I eat that? Is that okay to eat? Like, is that healthy? And I was like, yes, it is. And it was this idea that we've come so far away from our primary foods and understanding that is how our bodies understand how to function and use it as fuel, that we think anything comes in a package must be better because it's newer or whatever we think. I don't know. But it's this idea that we actually really understand that our basic human needs include just basic food. Doesn't have to be fancy. And I think sometimes we just make it all too glamorous.
Yes. Well, and that all sounds so simple. And what I'm wondering is, why do we make it so hard? I mean, I know for myself, when I cook for other people, sometimes I'll spend time, building these elaborate dishes, and what everybody ends up loving is something that had 3 ingredients that took me less than 5 minutes to make. And, when you say something like eat foods of your culture, right? have an apple, don't postpone taking care of yourself. That sounds so simple. Why is it so difficult for us to do?
Yeah. I think partly because we're continuously thinking of technology and all of these things that are growing all the time and becoming more and more advanced. And we're sort of forgetting that we're still just basic human beings, and that's a good thing. And we just need the basic stuff still. We need water, we need food, we need sleep, we need rest, we need connection, we need conversation. And part of the technology trend has sort of also disconnected us a little bit from, especially now, having been, over Zoom meetings for months, and at this point, we're getting a little bit disconnected from that pause where we can just sort of talk to each other that we used to have in the canteen or at the water cooler kind of conversations. And I think it's important that we look at what is it that we as human beings really thrive on. We really thrive on care. Basic.
And it's almost like we've been treating care and self-care as a destination. Like, yes, we'll get there. I'll get to the other side of all of these meetings and this to-do list, and then I'll care for myself, whether that's waiting to the end of the day to eat a meal or taking this pause. And I think what you're saying is part of the mindset shift is care is not a destination or an outcome.
No, it's a way of being.
Well, somebody listening to this is saying, that sounds great, Jeanette, but you don't know my boss. You don't know my company. I mean, we're an entrepreneurial company. We're a startup. We're about to go public. We had to downsize all of our employees because of the pandemic. This sounds great as a theory, but you don't know my boss. I mean, is it possible to have care cultures?
It is, but yes, it's really good to have a boss involved in this. And also leaders do need to start modeling this, partly by taking care of themselves, but also partly by encouraging it in that sense. And again, I want to remind everybody that taking care of ourselves isn't necessarily, as you said, a destination or a habit at the end of the day, or a break. Walking away from our desk is good, but it can be 5 minutes. We need that pause in between. But taking care of ourselves is also creating positive conversations. So even a leader that starts having that sort of curious, why, what's going on, what do you need? Like that question, what do you need so that you can, is also a question that a leader needs to start asking people. Instead of coming in and saying, why is this not happening? And we start looking at all the reasons why it's not happening, instead asking, okay, so this is not happening. What do you need so you can make it happen? It's really learning a new language, a care-driven language, but it's also so small and simple that once we start intentionally paying attention to this, we can learn how to do that differently. And so even if we are working under a boss that is a bit of a hard push, I've certainly worked for some of those, we can still have a positive relationship with ourselves. It's hard to do. I know that it's not easy, but we can have a positive relationship with ourselves and say, okay, I hear you. I'm feeling really like talking to ourselves, right? Instead of the inner critic that comes in and goes, see, you're not doing enough. We can do, okay, it feels like I'm not doing enough, but let me just pause here for a moment and recognize, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. What else do I need so that I can? We can do this on our own, even if our boss isn't on board. Granted, if you want to shift to a care-driven culture, it needs to be a rollout system. Like it needs to be from the top down, starting to change the conversation about self-care from the inside out, so that it is a conversation, not a habit.
And what you said is so powerful. It's difficult to have a caring conversation with a colleague in an authentic and fully present way if we're not having those caring conversations with ourselves. And what I wonder when I see these results and studies about the level of burnout and people resigning without having other jobs because they think that's the best and most self-caring action they can take. What strikes me is that we need some new conversational tools. And what I wonder, I mean, even if it's not a boss to an employee per se, maybe it's a conversation among colleagues. What are some other caring conversation techniques or new ways to ask questions that you might share with us that we could sort of speak into the conversations with our colleagues and into our culture?
I think one of the ones that I always want to pause on is what I call the right why. We ask, why is this not working, as I mentioned before? And then we can start looking at, so why does it matter? Does it matter? What's the impact it will have? Because then we're starting to unfold some of the hurdles that we need to get over, and some of the ways and the steps we need to take. So that's a constructive conversation. And that's what I call asking the right why. It's like, okay, let's really understand why this matters rather than why is it not working. So that's one way we can start that conversation. I also have another one that I use, which I call AAA, which is acknowledge how we feel, accept the circumstances for what they are, and then ask, what do we need so that we can? And so the AAA is something we can use as a conversation tool. And it really allows us to be heard, feel seen, acknowledge how you feel rather than trying to fix how somebody feels. Basically, when we're trying to fix how somebody feels, we're dismissing them, right? And we do that to ourselves already. We're dismissing how we feel rather than implementing and being inclusive of what's going on in there right now, right? And so we're distracted. We're not actually paying attention to what's right there, and we're solving the wrong problem potentially, right? So these conversations can help us look at it and really solve the right problem together. And so these are some of the conversations. So small tools like that, like the AAA, and I acknowledge I borrowed that from the AAA that gets you out of trouble at the side of the road. But if you look at it, if you're broken down at the side of the road, you're not going to spend a lot of time wishing it was different. You're just going to call AAA and be like, okay, I need a ride. I need to get out of here. Right. So it's all this time where we're not accepting the circumstances for what they are, because number one, we're dismissing how we feel. And then we're also talking about, well, things were different. I wouldn't feel this way. We're wasting so much time, and we're solving the wrong problem in most of our conversations. So if we can acknowledge these things, accept the circumstances for what they are, and then ask, okay, what do you need so that you can? Now we can move forward together.
It's like accept, adapt, accelerate.
Yes.
And
yes.
what I wonder is, what might change in our relationships, and how might we be more empathetic and caring toward others? If we ask that question, why does this matter so much to you?
Yeah.
In any given moment. Now, when I think about the work that you do with companies and help them create caring cultures, shifting from, an individual or one-on-one inside out change is a little different than shifting the culture of an entire organization. Tell me more about the work that you do with companies and what you've discovered works.
It's very different because every culture is different. And that just shows us how human driven a culture is, right? So it's very, you can almost think of culture as a system of relationships, because it is. It's like an ecosystem of relationships. And so all these relationships that we each have, if we can start looking at the energy that's running through the company and see what's driving that energy, if it's fear driven and survival mode driven, because we're always focusing on what's not being done, what I call the pothole philosophy. You know how if you're driving down the road and you want to avoid the pothole, you actually have to look at where you want to go rather than the pothole. But so many times we're just looking at the potholes, right? And we're hitting them all day long, all day long, all day long. And it becomes a culture that's driven by what's not working, what we're scared of, and really becomes a fear-driven culture. And so if we have a fear-driven culture, we also see that it's the people who are not taking a pause because they're afraid they can't make it happen, and so on and so forth. You have to remember, stress doesn't come from what we have to do. It comes from what we're afraid we're not able to do, right? Because stress can be positive as well. It can be part of growth. It can be part of pushing new boundaries. It can be exciting if it's based on care. It's something we care about, something we want to reach, right? Versus scared that we're not going to make it. And so when I talk to a culture, sort of get started with them, sometimes I'm called in as a keynote speaker because they want that moment of motivation and tools and really shift the mindset. Other times I'm called in to actually really help with a culture transformation. And we do different sessions with different layers in the organization. And I think that's where we really create impact, because we get people on board, right? Again, it's from top down, because change might happen from the inside out and from the bottom up because that's where action happens, but changing the thought system happens from the top down. So we need to get that on board. And so what I do is I look at where is the culture, what's the mission, what's the vision, what are these things that we already believe as a culture, and how can we support that with self-care? So that self-care isn't something we do out here. It's not sort of like a side hustle. What it is the foundation for creating that culture that we actually are looking to create. So that it becomes the true foundation of well-being culture. Self-care becomes the foundation for that. So that self-care is the foundation for high performance, burnout prevention, and keeping the culture intact and actually thriving in that sense, rather than looking at it as, well, that's your personal problem. Well, here we are, we're giving you some tools to do it, and now go do it. But really actually looking at it as a culture possibility. I think that's where real change happens. But yes, it takes that commitment to saying, oh, wait a minute, we have seen that being a people-driven company means that self-care is the foundation for doing that.
Well, what the pandemic presented is an opportunity for all of us, individually and collectively, to move from progressive tolerance, tolerating, commutes, situations and systems that didn't serve us, and an opportunity to move from progressive tolerance into progressive consciousness. I mean, I think we've all come into this of reckoning or moment of awakening where we're asking ourselves what matters. And our path forward into progressive consciousness and accessing choice and building caring cultures lives in this present moment, choices we can make right now, and acknowledging maybe we tolerated some beliefs and stories and habits that no longer serve us now.
I love that you're saying that, because what comes up for me as you're sort of recapping that and saying that is, if we want an inclusive culture, it starts by being inclusive of our basic human core needs, our humanity. Like, that's where inclusivity truly comes from.
And that's what I talk about in Success from Anywhere, that the future is about this movement from progressive tolerance into progressive consciousness, and that choice is always on and always available. Just because we didn't care for ourselves or have a caring culture in the past doesn't mean we can't create that now. And so much of the future is less about how we reconfigure the cubicles and more about how we redesign our relationship with work and care. And you've been kind to share so much wonderful wisdom with us. And for everyone watching and listening, how can they connect with you to continue the conversation going forward?
I'm being found everywhere on social media under my name, Jeanette Bronée. So my website, JeanetteBronée.com. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn under the same name. So that's where to find me and connect with me.
It strikes me that the most fitting way to end is for all of us to take a pause, take a deep breath, and think about just the next 5 minutes. What's the smallest step, right, that we could all take together? And, when we think about building care, living in the mindset of care that you were just talking about, that change and stepping into what's possible is as soon as taking a pause after watching or listening to the conversation we just had together.
I love that.
Thanks so much for joining us today and for sharing both how we can step forward into a new kind of care, and also learning how we can bring that caring conversation into the cultures where we work every day. Thanks so much.